I was hauling a bundle of firewood into the back of my truck when I saw her again, Charlene Griffin, HOA president and the self-appointed queen of our mountain community. Her bleach blonde bob bounced like it had its own attitude, and her high heels clicked across gravel like she was storming a boardroom instead of approaching my private drive. "Brandon Zeller," she barked, as if I owed her money, "we need to talk about your cabin." I wiped my hands on my jeans. "What about it?" She crossed her arms like she'd just caught me trespassing on my own property. "The HOA has scheduled a private event at your cabin this Saturday. 100 guests, caterers, portable heaters, the works." I blinked. "You did what?" Charlene huffed and waved her clipboard like it was a warrant. "Your cabin is listed under the community's shared assets." "No, it's not," I said, stepping closer. "I built that cabin with my own hands. It's on my land, paid for, registered, deeded." "You've got no claim," her eyes narrowed. "You signed the revised HOA charter last year." I narrowed mine right back. "No, I didn't. I refused. You tried to slide that clause in during the holiday potluck meeting, remember?" Charlene's face twitched. "Regardless, the HOA board voted unanimously." "It's happening. We've already sent out invites." "You're out of your mind," I said flatly. She stepped closer, her perfume hitting me like a chemical weapon. "Brandon, don't be difficult. The community deserves access to scenic spaces for events." "It's just one afternoon." "One afternoon with 100 people trampling my deck, using my bathroom, breaking my stuff," Charlene shrugged. "You won't even have to be there. We're bringing our own keys." That's when it clicked. "You copied my gate code." She gave a tight smile and turned to leave like she'd already won. "We'll be arriving at noon sharp. I suggest you make yourself scarce." I stood there for a moment, heart pounding. Then I dropped the firewood in the truck bed and got to work. First, I changed the gate code. Then I installed a new chain and padlock across the rear access trail. After that, I called my buddy who managed the local tow yard and gave him a heads up. Unauthorized vehicles on my land would be considered trespassers. Finally, I installed a motion-activated camera by the front gate and made sure the cabin's security system was online. By Friday night, I was camped out in the cabin with a pot of chili and a 6-pack, waiting for the fireworks. And oh, did they come. By noon on Saturday, the road up to my gate was lined with Lexuses, Range Rovers, a white catering van, and even a shuttle bus idling with the words Mountain Vista Private Events printed on the side. People in pressed khakis and designer puffer jackets were stepping out with wine totes and folding tables, laughing like they were arriving at some Instagram-perfect vineyard. Then the honking started. The lead car, a navy BMW SUV with vanity plates reading GRFN1, laid on the horn like it was going to unlock something. I watched the whole thing through the cabin's window, sipping coffee in my flannel like I was ringside at a circus. Eventually, Charlene climbed out, flanked by 2 men in matching scarves and a woman carrying a clipboard larger than her handbag. She marched to the gate, yanked on the new chain, and stopped dead. She turned to the crowd. "Everyone, please remain calm. There's been a small miscommunication." I stepped out onto the porch, leaned against the railing, and called out, "You mean the part where you planned a party on private property without asking the owner?" She turned, the color in her cheeks rising like a thermometer left in the sun. "Brandon, this behavior is incredibly hostile. You're creating a scene." "Nope," I said. "You created the scene. I'm just enjoying the show." She stormed up to the gate, gripping the bars like an inmate. "We had this space scheduled." "You're violating the committee's approved event calendar." "Hate to break it to you, Charlene, but your calendar doesn't overrule property deeds." The clipboard lady leaned over to whisper something to her, and Charlene waved her away. "We are within our rights under Article 12, Section 6 of the Community Coordination Guidelines." I held up my phone. "Already checked. That section only applies to common grounds and recreational zones, neither of which include my cabin." The crowd behind her started murmuring. A man in a fleece vest pulled out his phone and began scrolling. "You're being unbelievably selfish," Charlene said through gritted teeth. "And you're trespassing," I replied. "In fact, I raised my voice so the whole group could hear. The sheriff's office has been notified. They're sending someone up to clear the road. So unless you want to explain to Deputy Hines why you're trying to force entry onto private land, I suggest you all head back down the mountain." That did it. A few people backed toward their cars. The shuttle driver flicked his blinker on. The caterers exchanged glances and began slowly closing the back of their van. Charlene wasn't done. "You'll regret this, Brandon. I'll have the board issue a cease and desist. We'll take legal action if necessary," I shrugged. "Go ahead. I've already spoken to my attorney. He's more than ready to file a counterclaim for trespassing, attempted unlawful entry, and misappropriation of community funds, because I'm guessing you used HOA money to rent all this, right?" She froze. "Oh yeah," I said, stepping forward. "The food, the rentals, the shuttle. Billing it under community development won't hold up. I called around yesterday. That shuttle company requires payment up front. You used the HOA account." Clipboard lady looked like she wanted to disappear. "It was unanimously approved," Charlene said, but her voice had gone flat. "Really?" I said. "Because 3 board members told me you canceled last month's meeting and never rescheduled. So either you forged a vote or you held a private session without quorum. Both are violations of the bylaws. Not to mention a few state regulations." Charlene's eyes darted to the people watching her. The murmuring grew louder. Someone asked what dues we're actually paying for. A woman in a beanie muttered something about recalling the board. Then the deputy's SUV crested the hill. Deputy Hines stepped out, adjusted his belt, and looked over the scene. "Afternoon," he said slowly. "Got a report of unauthorized gathering on private land." Charlene immediately launched into a breathless explanation about community initiatives, miscommunications, and how I had misunderstood the role of shared spaces. Hines turned to me. "You the owner?" I nodded and handed him a folder. "Property deed, dated survey, and a statement from my lawyer. Everything's in there." He flipped through it, gave a low whistle, then looked at Charlene. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you and your guests to vacate the area." Now, her jaw clenched. "This is ridiculous. He's weaponizing technicalities." "No, ma'am," Hines said. "You tried to host a private event on property you don't own without permission. That's not a technicality, that's unlawful." Someone in the back started clapping, then another. Soon half the group was applauding while slowly heading back to their cars. Charlene stood frozen as her carefully staged event unraveled in real time. The shuttle pulled away. The caterers peeled off. Even Clipboard Lady got in a Prius and drove off without a word. Deputy Hines waited until the last car rolled down the hill before turning back to her. "You can leave now, or we can talk about trespassing charges." She finally turned and walked to her BMW without another word. The tires sprayed gravel as she drove off, too fast for the narrow curve. I exhaled and looked at the empty road. Then my phone buzzed. It was Gregor, one of the board members who'd always kept his head down. "You didn't hear this from me," he said, "but there's a paper trail. She used the HOA's discretionary fund to pay for all of its shuttle, food, even decorations. And she backdated the vote log. Think the other members will back you if we push for an audit after today," he said. "They're already sharpening the knives." I hung up and walked back inside, already pulling up the HOA's online records. If Charlene thought today was bad, wait until she saw what I had planned for the next board meeting. 2 days after the fiasco, I pulled into the community center parking lot for the emergency HOA board meeting. The lot was already full. Trucks, sedans, and a few dusty Subarus lined the curb, all pointed toward the building like they wanted front-row seats to the implosion. Inside, folding chairs had been dragged out of storage. A full house. Gregor waved me over from the front where the 5 board members sat at a long table minus Charlene, who was noticeably absent. Her seat, marked with a gold-embossed nameplate, was empty except for a neatly stacked pile of manila folders I recognized immediately. I took a seat in the front row as Gregor stood and tapped the mic. "Thanks for coming on short notice," he said. "As acting vice chair, I'm calling this session to order. We've received serious claims of misconduct regarding board decisions and resource allocation. Specifically, the unauthorized use of HOA funds and the attempted misuse of private property." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Gregor continued, "To be clear, these allegations have been supported by documentation. We've also been informed that the sheriff's office has begun a formal inquiry." He nodded toward the back, and I turned to see a mountain of a man in uniform, Detective Alan Franks from the county's Financial Crimes Division. He didn't carry the easy grin of a local deputy. This guy looked like he'd been pulling fraud cases out of small town shadows for 20 years. He stepped to the podium. "I've reviewed the preliminary evidence. What we're looking at includes misappropriation of HOA funds, falsification of official meeting minutes, and potential wire fraud. These aren't civil issues. These are criminal charges." The room went dead quiet. He held up a folder. "We have financial statements showing over $15,000 spent from the HOA's discretionary account over the past 3 months with no recorded votes or approvals. The bulk of it was used to plan last Saturday's event." A gray-haired woman in the second row stood up. "You mean she used our dues to throw herself a private party?" "That's correct," Franks said, "and attempted to stage it on land she had no authority over. We've also subpoenaed the HOA's digital records. The vote logs were altered entries backdated, fake names attached to multiple approvals. It's a textbook case of fraud." Gregor looked pale but resolute. "We've already voted to suspend Charlene's position pending investigation. A full financial audit is underway. We're also moving to freeze the discretionary account until a new oversight process is implemented." A man near the aisle stood up, arms crossed. "What happens to the money? Can we get it back?" Franks nodded. "If charges are filed and a conviction is secured, restitution will be part of sentencing. But we'll also be looking into whether any vendors or service providers knowingly cooperated. If they did, we can recover more." Gregor cleared his throat. "There's one more item. Brandon Zeller," he motioned toward me, "has filed a formal grievance regarding the attempted seizure of his private property." I stood up, holding a flash drive between my fingers. "This has copies of the gate camera footage, voice recordings from the confrontation, and a notarized statement from 3 board members who confirmed no vote ever occurred. I'm also submitting a petition signed by 62 residents requesting Charlene's permanent removal." Franks walked over and took the drive, sliding it into a government-issued laptop. "Thank you, Mr. Zeller. This will be added to the case file." A woman in the back raised her hand. "What happens next?" Franks closed the laptop. "Next step is bringing her in for questioning. If she doesn't cooperate, we issue a warrant. Either way, she won't be running anything around here anytime soon." Gregor let out a breath. Meeting adjourned. Nobody moved. They just sat there, stunned, like they were watching the credits roll on a bad movie that had finally ended. I left the building and found Gregor standing by the flagpole, arms folded. "She's going to fight this," he said. "Lawyer up." "Probably claims she was misled or didn't understand the bylaws." I nodded. "She can try, but the paper trail's solid and the community's finally paying attention." He looked out across the parking lot. "Funny thing. When she first ran for president, she promised transparency and a return to tradition, said she wanted to protect the neighborhood's values." I laughed once. "Guess fraud's one of them." Later that day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered, expecting another neighbor looking for details. Instead, a man's clipped voice said, "Mr. Zeller, this is Assistant District Attorney Reuben McGuire. I'd like to discuss your statement and the evidence you submitted." I stepped into my cabin's kitchen and closed the door behind me. "Sure, what do you need? First, I want to thank you. You've made this case easier to prosecute. Second, we're filing charges within 72 hours. I'd like to know if you'd be willing to testify." I didn't even hesitate. "Absolutely." Good, we're also looking into a second issue. There's evidence Charlene used HOA funds to pay a private contractor for landscape improvements on a property not owned by the HOA. I frowned. Whose property? That's what we're trying to determine. The contractor's records are vague, but one invoice includes a GPS tag. It's about 50 yards from your west fence line. I ran a hand through my hair. That's the edge of the wildlife corridor. It's protected land. Nobody's supposed to touch it. Exactly. The Department of Environmental Regulation is already involved. If she ordered unauthorized work on that slope, she's looking at felony charges. By the time I hung up, the sun was setting behind the ridge. I walked down to the western edge of my land and found exactly what I'd feared: fresh tire tracks, a few recently planted shrubs, and a battered sign that used to say "Conservation Area No Development." Charlene hadn't just tried to steal my cabin. She'd used HOA money to illegally landscape protected land, probably to make it more presentable for her party. I took photos, geotagged them, and sent them to the ADA. The next morning, a squad car parked outside her house. She didn't come out. Not when the officer knocked, not when he left a notice taped to her door. But by noon, word was everywhere. By sundown, her house was quiet. No porch lights, no movement. Just a cold silence that settled across the street like a warning. Over the next week, things changed fast. An emergency election was held, and residents from every corner came out to vote. Charlene's name wasn't even on the ballot. Gregor won by a landslide, with a newcomer named Dahlia, an ER nurse who'd lived here for 10 years, but never joined a meeting, taking the treasurer's slot. With the new board in place, they passed a resolution banning any HOA expenditures over $1,000 without dual signatures and public posting. They also implemented a rule that any use of community funds for events required a 75% approval from attending members. I didn't run for a seat. I didn't want one. But I did agree to help draft the new bylaws with Dahlia. She had a sharp eye and zero patience for nonsense. We worked late a few nights, tweaking language, clarifying loopholes Charlene had exploited. One night while we were reviewing the final article, she looked up from her laptop. "You ever think about selling this place?" she asked. "Not once," I said. "Why?" She smiled, not smug, just tired but satisfied. "Because we need more people like you around when stuff like this happens." I leaned back in my chair. "Hopefully it won't happen again." She closed her laptop. "Hope's good. But bylaws and locked gates are better." We both laughed, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like the community actually belonged to the people who lived in it, not the ones who tried to rule it. 3 weeks after the board meeting, I stood at the community center podium, reviewing final revisions to the new HOA charter. The room was quieter than it had been in years. No raised voices, no clipped interruptions, no power-hungry glares from the head of the table. Charlene's chair had been quietly removed the day after her suspension. A new wooden plaque reading "Public Input Welcome" now hung on the wall where her framed portrait used to be. The vote passed without a single objection. Afterward, Dahlia and I walked out into the cold dusk, the parking lot wet from an afternoon drizzle. She pulled her keys from her coat pocket but didn't unlock her car yet. "I got a call from a state investigator this morning," she said. They had questions about a landscaping contract Charlene pushed through last winter, something about tree removal on the north slope. I frowned. That's a no-clear zone. She signed off on that. She did more than sign off. She apparently submitted a falsified environmental impact report under the HOA's name. I stared at her. She forged a state document? Yup. And she made it look like it came from the Division of Forestry. The font didn't even match. The investigator said it was one of the sloppiest forgeries he's ever seen. I shook my head, trying to imagine the gall. Dahlia looked over her shoulder at the center's darkened windows. "They're filing additional charges. State level this time." I didn't say anything for a while. The wind shifted, blowing the scent of wet pine across the lot. Finally, I said, "She never thought she'd get caught. No, Dahlia replied, walking toward her car. She thought the rules were hers to bend. The following Monday, I got a knock on my cabin door just after sunrise. Not the usual soft tap of a neighbor, either. It was firm, deliberate. When I opened it, a pair of men in dark suits stood beneath my porch awning. "Brandon Zeller?" the older one asked, holding up a badge. "Special Agent Darrow, State Bureau of Investigations." "This is Agent Lynn." Lynn nodded while unzipping a leather bag. "We'd like to ask you some questions about the HOA's use of state funds over the past fiscal year." I stepped aside and let them in. Over the next hour, I learned more than I wanted to know. Charlene hadn't just misused HOA dues, she'd used falsified grant applications to secure state funds for community beautification projects. Over $40,000 had been funneled into accounts she controlled directly as president, under the claim that they were being used for public trails and erosion control. Only there were no trail markers, no invoices for soil stabilization, no work done, period. "Where'd the money go?" I asked. Darrow opened a folder and slid a photo across the table. "Private contractor in Lakeview, custom deck, outdoor sound system, imported stone fire pit. All installed on a property owned by Charlene's cousin. He's claiming he thought she paid with personal funds." I stared at the photo. The deck looked freshly stained, the stones still clean of soot. "Let me guess, he lives outside HOA jurisdiction?" "Exactly," Darrow said. "No oversight. No questions." The agents asked for copies of anything I had that might prove Charlene had access to HOA financials without proper review. I handed them a thumb drive with old board emails, including one where Charlene had dismissed a request for a spending audit by claiming the books were already reviewed by her personal accountant. Lynn raised an eyebrow. "Her personal accountant," she said. "It saved time," I said. They packed up their files, thanked me, and left. I watched their car disappear around the bend, then turned back inside to start a pot of coffee. I had a feeling I'd be hearing from them again. By the end of the week, I did. Charlene had been arrested outside her cousin's house. The local paper ran a front-page photo of her being led into a cruiser in a red coat, sunglasses on despite the rain, lips pressed into a line like she still thought she could spin the situation. The charges were extensive: wire fraud, misuse of public funds, forgery, and conspiracy. The last one caught my attention. I called Gregor. "Yeah," he said, his voice tight. "Turns out she had help. From the board? No, from her cousin and a contractor who was submitting fake invoices for work that never happened. They split the money. The contractor's already copped a plea. She's going away for a long time, isn't she? Looks that way." I was quiet a moment. "How's the community taking it?" "Mixed. Some people are still in shock. Others are furious they didn't notice sooner, but most just want to move on. We're holding a town cleanup next Saturday. You should come." I did. By mid-morning, I was hauling broken branches and soda cans into a trailer while a group of teenagers painted over graffiti on an old trail sign. Dahlia walked past with a clipboard and a thermos, handing out coffee and organizing tool returns. No one shouted. No one argued about paint colors or who was in charge. People just worked. At one point, an older man I didn't recognize approached me. He wore a patched vest and carried a rake over one shoulder. "You're the one who shut her down, right?" "I just locked a gate," I said. He nodded once. "Sometimes that's all it takes." Later that day, while I was hosing off my boots behind the cabin, a county truck pulled up along my drive. A man in a polo with a forestry badge stepped out and waved. "You Brandon?" "Yeah." He reached into the cab and pulled out a parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Just came from the county commission. They wanted you to have this." I peeled the paper back to find a wooden plaque engraved with the county seal in recognition of civic vigilance and protection of public lands, awarded to Brandon Zeller. I turned it over. A handwritten note was taped to the back. "Thanks for keeping the gate closed. Some things are worth guarding." I didn't mount it on the wall. I didn't need to, but I did leave it on the shelf above the fireplace where anyone who visited could see it if they looked. 3 weeks passed. then 6. Then the trial started. I wasn't called to testify until day 4. The courtroom was packed. Charlene sat at the defense table in a blazer 2 sizes too tight, her hair pulled back so severely it looked painful. She didn't look at me when I walked past. The prosecutor walked me through my testimony. I stuck to the facts: the gate, the confrontation, the funds, the documents. I identified the audio recordings and confirmed they hadn't been edited. I described the conservation zone and the evidence of landscaping. Charlene's attorney tried to paint me as a disgruntled neighbor with a personal vendetta. Isn't it true you refused to participate in HOA meetings for several years? I attended when the meetings were legitimate, I replied. Isn't it also true you made threats during the gate incident? No. I made legal warnings. There's a difference. The judge didn't even let him finish his next question. By the end of the week, the case was closed, guilty on all counts. Charlene was sentenced to 9 years with parole eligibility after 5. Her cousin got 3. The contractor walked with a fine and a suspended license. The HOA board held a final vote to dissolve the discretionary fund altogether. From now on, every dollar spent had to be posted publicly, and all board meetings were streamed online. A rotating citizen panel was created to review all spending proposals. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. A month later, I got an envelope in the mail, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, my cabin taken from the trail, golden light glowing through the windows, untouched and peaceful. On the back, someone had written, "Still standing." I tossed a few more logs into the fire, poured myself a drink, and sat back in the chair on the porch. The air was sharp and clean, the kind of mountain evening that settled into your bones. The cabin was quiet. The gate was locked. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly how it should be, still standing.